I have two stories to share, both taking place in a popular forest in Germany that's frequented by hikers like me. While the forest is usually a peaceful escape, these two experiences left me shaken. It happened about a year ago during a midweek hike. I arrived at the parking lot, which is typically bustling with 20 to 40 cars on weekends. This time, however, it was eerily empty. I was completely alone. I set off on my usual route, one I had hiked over 10 times before. After a few kilometers, the trail led me toward an open field. But before I even reached the clearing, I heard it, screams echoing through the forest. These weren't ordinary sounds. They were blood-curdling, inhuman screams that sent a chill down my spine. I've encountered all sorts of wildlife before: deer, foxes, wild boars, rabbits, but this was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It sounded straight out of a horror movie or a nightmare. My instincts kicked in, and the hike was over for me. I turned around and sprinted back to my car, heart pounding the entire way. To this day, I don't know what made those screams, and I'm not sure I want to find out. Story 2: The horror section of the trail. The second experience happened just a week ago, also during a hike. Have you ever had that unsettling feeling that someone is watching you? You turn around, but nothing is there. That's the feeling I get every time I hike a particular section of this trail, a stretch of about 3 kilometers that I now call the horror section. This part of the trail changes constantly, but not because of humans. Nature seems to rule here. Trees regularly fall, blocking the path, deer frequently cross my way, and recently, more and more wild boar tracks have appeared. Every time I enter this section, I feel the overwhelming need to rush through it. But beyond this eerie stretch lies a breathtaking valley, a dense, fairy tale-like scene straight out of a grim story. It's worth enduring the unease to reach it, or so I thought. On my most recent hike, the chills returned the moment I stepped into the horror section. I quickened my pace, determined to get through. Then it happened, a deer suddenly appeared, crossing my path. But it didn't just pass by. It stopped in the middle of the trail and stared at me, as if to say, "Turn back. You don't belong here." I froze. The deer didn't move, blocking my way entirely. It felt like a warning, but I refused to turn back. I was 80% through the horror section, so I decided to veer off the path and cut through the forest to avoid the deer. It worked, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Even after I reached the valley, I couldn't shake the sense that something, or someone, was following me. I kept looking over my shoulder, relieved each time I saw nothing. Gradually, I began to relax as I continued hiking and planned my next rest stop. Then, my worst fear became a reality. The last few weeks had brought heavy rain to the region, and the small stream running alongside the trail had swelled into a raging river, flooding the path ahead. With temperatures near freezing, crossing the river wasn't an option. I was trapped. The valley was dense, with no alternate routes. The only way out was to turn back, through the horror section. To make matters worse, it was winter, and the sun would set in 2 hours. But I had taken over 3 hours to reach this point. Panic set in. I had no choice but to run. I didn't care about the noises of the forest, breaking branches, rustling leaves, or startled animals. I was consumed by one thought: reaching my car. My keys were my lifeline, the only thing separating me from safety. I sprinted through the horror section, heart racing, eyes darting, always expecting to see something, or someone, behind me. When I finally reached my car, I unlocked it with trembling hands, jumped inside, and locked the doors. I drove away, vowing never to return to that part of the forest again. Some places are better left undisturbed. I always thought that ghosts were a figment of our imagination, something that existed only in stories and movies. That was until I moved into my new apartment. At first, everything seemed normal. But after a few weeks, strange things started happening. I would hear footsteps in the hallway outside my door, but when I went to check, no one was there. Objects would move on their own, and doors would slam shut when there was no wind. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I saw a figure standing in the corner of my room. It was transparent and seemed to be made of mist. I couldn't believe my eyes. I froze, unable to move or even scream. The figure began to move towards me, and I felt a cold breeze on my face. I could feel its presence getting stronger, and my heart was racing. I didn't know what to do. Suddenly, the figure disappeared, and everything went quiet. I was left alone in the dark, trembling with fear. I didn't sleep at all that night, and I spent the rest of the week trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination. But the following night, the figure returned. It was closer this time, and I could see that it was a woman. She seemed to be reaching out to me, and I could feel her cold breath on my face. I was too scared to move or scream, and I just lay there, frozen in terror. After that night, the figure appeared every night. She would come closer and closer, until I could almost touch her. I tried to ignore her, but I couldn't. I was terrified, and I knew I had to do something. I spoke to my landlord, and he told me that the apartment building was built on an old cemetery. He said that many people had reported seeing ghosts in the building, and that some had even moved out because they couldn't handle the paranormal activity. I knew I had to get out of there. I packed my bags and left the apartment that night. As I was leaving, I saw the figure in the hallway. She was smiling, and I could feel her presence even as I walked out of the building. I will never forget my experience in that apartment. It taught me that ghosts are real, and that sometimes, there's no escaping the horrors of the supernatural.